Okay, it's being recorded.
Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock, and we'll give just a few more minutes to allow some of our participants in as we get ready to start our webinar. We've had a lot of people register for this, so we'll give them a minute or two to start logging in. If you would like, you could go ahead and put your name and where you're located at in the chat. For this as well, we will have an opportunity later on in the presentation to post questions in the Q&A, as we'll watch that as well.
Yes, if everyone joining could put their name in the chat, that would really help us with the attendance. If you could put your first and last name.
Great. We'll give it just a few more minutes here as we have a lot of people registering in. Thank you. And we still have participants trying to log in, and Kyle's letting them in. So we'll continue with that, giving it just another minute or so before we begin our presentation. Okay, it looks like that's starting to slow down now, so we'll go ahead and begin with our presentation. So my name's Rodney Cool, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Southeastern Kentucky Small Business Development Center in partnership with our Kentucky Bankers Associations and presentation on FinCen's Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting and Webinar. I'm Rodney Cool, Center Director and Business Coach with Southeastern Kentucky Small Business Development Center. We're based in London, Kentucky, which is one of 10 centers throughout the Commonwealth, providing services to all 120 counties. We also have joining us out of our center, business coach, Kyle Mann. And if you're not familiar with the Small Business Development Center, or SBDCs for short, let me share that with you just for a minute. We provide assistance to entrepreneurs like yourself, regardless of what point you are in life cycles of your business. So if you're just starting out, or we can assist with market research, business plan development, help finding startup capital. If you're an existing business and need assistance in growing your business, whether that's hiring first employees or finding capital to expand your operations, maybe you need help with cash flow or want to pivot your business. And if you're ready to retire and don't know what to do in order to sell your business, we can help guide you through all of those different situations. Our professional staff has a wide array of knowledge and experience in various industries, which allows us to customize service for your business needs. We do all this at no cost to you, thanks to the U.S. Small Business Administration co-sponsoring our program, which is administered from the UK Martin Gatton College of Ag, Food and Environment, who are our host and partners in the state of Kentucky, along with other regional universities, community colleges, local economic development agencies, and to deliver these services. We are part of a national network called America's SBDC, which is serving throughout the United States. And to learn more about the Kentucky SBDC, you can go to our website at KentuckySBDC.com. And if you need additional resources, you can give us a call at 606-454-7042 or 606-401-0777. A recording of today's webinar and slide presentations will be emailed to you probably someday next week. Once we get the recording, we'll upload that and send you the link to it. So if you have to step away or you have something else going on, just know that you'll get access to it. And so our speaker and presenter for today is Jesse Southworth, and Jesse is a graduate of Transylvania University. Miss Southworth spent 10 years as a regulator with the Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions, where she occupied a range of positions, including field examiner, case manager, training coordinator, and acting branch manager. During that time, she specialized in conducting Kentucky Bank Secrecy Act examinations. She also received the inaugural Charles A. Vice Leadership Award in 2023 for her leadership and teamwork. During her time with KDFI, Ms. Southworth taught a BSA in anti-money laundering examiner school for the Conference of State Bank Supervisors that provide examiners across the state with skills needed to conduct BSA examinations. She received special recognition for her contributions as an instructor in 2022. Ms. Southworth is now the Director of Education for the Kentucky Bankers Association in Kentucky. So we thank you, Jesse, for taking time to present this for us today. And so we ask you, tell us what we need to know about this very important reporting of FinCen's business owners information.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. So today I'm going to talk to you about the beneficial ownership information reporting system, pretty much who has to report, what is required of you, where to report, and when. So pretty much all the main stuff that you're going to need to know to comply with this law. I'm also going to walk you through to the website of where to report, and then show you what are some like great resources if you have questions. We will have a question and answer session at the end. When I have the PowerPoint up, I can't see the comments. So if there is a comment and you want me to stop, just have someone come off mute and kind of holler at me too, so that I'm aware there's a question. So a little bit of a background. In 2021, Congress passed the Corporate Transparency Act. And so what this law does is it requires entities to file what's considered a beneficial ownership information. And we will talk about what that is later if you are unfamiliar. To FinCen, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They have a beneficial ownership information e-filing system. And so every entity across the United States, information is aggregated in this system. So you might ask yourself, well, why did they do this? Why did they create this law? So it was done as the U.S. government's efforts to track and stop money laundering by hindering criminals' ability to hide their illicit profits in shell corporations. So it's going to pierce that the corporate veil in the shell corporations to see who's actually the ownership behind those corporations. So that's why this law came into existence. Okay. So first of all, who should report? And the main category for who should report is essentially anyone who files with the Secretary of State's office. You're going to see that's a common thing we talk about, is that filing with the Secretary of State's office is going to trigger you to be a reporting company unless you qualify for one of the 23 exemptions. And we will talk about those exemptions. This is not an annual requirement. It is a one-time filing unless any of the information changes. And then you would have to update the information in the system. What you might have noticed if you've opened up a bank account since 2018 is financial institutions probably have been asking you for this beneficial ownership information, because that's a requirement on their part. Because you give that information to financial institutions, it does not relieve you of having to file through this system. You still have to go to FinCen's website and put your information into this system. And really, if you put that information, that beneficial ownership information, to any other agency, you still have to go to FinCen's website if you qualify to be a reporting company and report it through FinCen's website. Because what that is it's just going to aggregate all that system together, where just if the system held at financial institutions, they're not aggregated. It's just held at each individual financial institution. And like I said, you should still expect that them to ask those questions from you if you open up a bank account there. But if you have a parent company that has multiple subsidiaries under it, the parent company cannot file one aggregate beneficial ownership information report for all the companies under it. Each company is going to need to file that beneficial ownership information report into the system. Okay. One thing I did want to point out too is if you have a foreign corporation that's registered to do business in the United States, once again, through that Secretary of State filing, they will also be a reporting company as well. Okay, so I said there's 23 exempt entities. Here is a list of all the exempt entities. At the very end of the presentation, I'm going to show you a resource that's available. If you think that you qualify for one of these exempt entities, the FinCen has developed a document to kind of ask several questions for each exempt entity just to verify, and I will show you that you do in fact qualify for one of these exempt entities. I wanted to point out two on the list. So I know we have some bankers on the call. A bank is an exempt entity. And for all our small businesses on the call, an inactive entity is considered an exempt entity. So if you have a prior SO or Secretary of State filing, but that entity is now inactive, then it is an exempt entity. If a company were to file a beneficial ownership report and then later become exempt, they would just update that report at the very top, stating that they are an exempt entity. So therefore, they would not be required to update any of the information because they are an exempt entity. On the flip side, if you have a company that was prior an exempt entity but is no longer qualified for that exemption status, then you would need to file that report with FinCen and just file it with the information, the beneficial ownership information that is required. A few more things with exempt entities. So if you are a beneficial owner and you have multiple interest in different entities, if your interest is in exclusively exempt entities, then what would happen is each of those entities would file a report with FinCen, and on the report, all they mark, and I'll show you that, is that they're an exempt entity. Therefore, you would not have to put your beneficial ownership information in there because that entity is exempt. On the other side, if ownership interest is held in both exempt entities and non-exempt entities, once again, that exempt entity would report that they are exempt. And on that form, you wouldn't have to put your beneficial ownership information. However, on the forms that are not exempt entities, you would have to fill out that information. So ultimately, the beneficial ownership information would be input in the system and have to be updated. So the next topic I want to talk about is if your entity has an unaffiliated company that is coming in and doing the day-to-day management of operations. So if that applies to your institution, or sorry, your entity, it really depends on the power that that unaffiliated company has. If they're coming in and they're just managing operations but have no decision-making authority, they would not be considered a beneficial owner. However, if they are exercising control and have decision-making authority, and we'll talk about some guidelines of what is considered decision-making authority a little bit later in the slide deck, then they would be considered a beneficial owner. Okay, so reporting timelines. If your entity was created prior to January 1st, 2024, and January 1st, 2024 is when the system was up and running. So if your entity was created prior to that, you have an entire year to put your information in the system. So it is not due until January 1st, 2025. However, if you are a new entity that was registered after January 1st, 2024, or later, then you would have 90 days once your registration is effective to register in the FinCen database. Now, that is just for entities that were created pretty much to the calendar year of 2024. So from January 1st to December 31st. Once we get to January 1st, 2025, the new entity's registration period is shortened to 30 days. So once we hit January 1st, 2025 and going forward, it's going to be 30 days. So pretty much what FinCen did is, this is a new system. It's a new process for entities. So new entities got a little more registration time than what will happen than what there will be once the system has been up and going for a while. If there's any changes in the information that you have input in the system, you have 30 days to change that information. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it was an entity that was before January 1st, after January 1st, or in 2025. It's still, you have a 30-day time period to change that information and to update it. Okay, so what if you don't report? So it is, this law requires you to report. However, FinCen is charged with enforcement action. So they have that enforcement power, and they will cite penalties. You have both civil money penalties, and you could have criminal penalties if you do not report. So civil money penalties would be $500 per day the violation continues, and that would be up to $500. Which, as you can imagine, I think I did the math, and it's $182,000 a year if they go for that max $500 a day. Criminal penalties would be up to 2 years in prison and or a $10,000 fine. So there's both civil money penalties and criminal penalties. Now, when FinCen is assessing these enforcements, they're going to look for willfully not filing or willfully not updating this. So if there is an accident, if they're going to look for that willfully you're not complying with this law. And typically this first year, if there's a mistake in filing and you realize it, they're probably going to be pretty forgiving because they're looking for that willfully not abiding by this law when they're looking at that enforcement authorities, but you don't want to go over the 30-day limits for updating information. So what happens if a beneficial owner withholds information? You are, as an entity, are still required to report that information to FinCen. So even if they are not giving you the information to report, you still are ultimately responsible for reporting that information to FinCen. So what FinCen did is they, as part of their guidance, urged companies to consider putting in place mechanisms to ensure that beneficial ownership information is reported and updated. So what that could look like is employment contracts, performance evaluation plans for those senior officers or key decision makers in that entity that would need that information. If you're looking at a board member that's a beneficial owner that meets that qualification, you could put it in your bylaws that is a requirement to be a board member. So that's what FinCen has suggested to try to keep that from happening. But you would be ultimately responsible for ensuring that information is updated. Senior officers and beneficial owners, even if they don't directly work for the company, if they're considered a beneficial owner, say through ownership, they could themselves face the civil and criminal penalties for not filing. Like I said, it's going to be willfully not filing or updating this information. Okay, so reporting. There will be no fees for reporting this information, which is very good for our small businesses. There's a website I've included on this slide deck that will take you to the filing page of where you need to go to file your beneficial ownership information. However, at the end of this slideshow, I'm going to walk through, and I'm going to show you the website, show you what it looks like. So you are equipped with that when you go off and file this yourself. So there are 3 choices of how you can file. You can file online and just input the information and send it. The only thing when you file online is you need to input all that information at one time. If you were to click out of the browser, there's not a way where it saves it and you could go back to it. You would just lose that information. You could do a PDF. So what will happen is you will download an editable PDF on your computer. And then that way you can input the information, save it, make sure all the information's there that you need. And then when you're finished, you can upload it back onto the FinCen's website. You can also do a system-to-system API if you would like to do this. What FinCen advises, and because they don't have a lot of information out there on this, it is an option, but you need to contact FinCen directly, talk to one of the representatives, and they will have to work it out with your organization to do this. So a lot of times what I foresee happening if people or entities using the system to system API is going to be probably your larger entities or your third party that are doing this type of activity and registering on behalf of the individual or multiple different companies is how I foresee if they're going to go that route. That's the type of route it would be. So most FinCen estimates that the majority of these beneficial ownership filings are going to be very simplistic. So if you think about your small businesses, it's quite possible that you could have one beneficial owner because you could have one person that both 100% owns entity and 100% runs entity. So that's one beneficial owner. But FinCen estimates that most of these filings are going to be very simplistic. So therefore, companies are not required to use professional services such as a CPA or an attorney to do these filings. You can use them if you would like, but you do not have to use them. And because of that, so the company can authorize anyone to file this information for them. So you can authorize an attorney or a certified public accountant to file this information on behalf of the company, but you do not have to. For sole proprietorships, being a sole proprietorship in and of itself would not make you a reporting company. It really goes back to, is a sole proprietorship registered with the Secretary of State's office? If it is not registered with the Secretary of State's office, then it would not be a reporting company. Okay, so beneficial owner. I've talked about beneficial owners, but what actually is a beneficial owner? So there's a two-pronged approach for beneficial owners. You have the ownership prong and the control prong. So with the ownership prong, it would be someone who owns or controls at least 25% ownership interest in the company. So, and it says owns or controls because you might have someone that doesn't own, say, voting rights, just the voting rights shares of stock, but they control those voting rights. So if they control those voting rights and those voting rights are over that 25% threshold, then they would qualify as a beneficial owner through the ownership prong. The other prong is the control prong, and it's someone who exercises substantial control over the company. Now you think substantial control, and that could be interpreted multiple different ways. That can be very subjective. So FinCen has come up with different things to consider for substantial control. They lay out what is considered substantial control, and we will go over those in just a minute. For beneficial owners, you're going to need your name, date of birth of that beneficial owner, the physical address, and an identification. So, such as, and we will go over acceptable identifications later. Say you have a driver's license. What's your driver's license number? Where was it issued? And then you would upload a copy of that document. So FinCen expects every company to have at least one beneficial owner. Has substantial control. Like I said, that can be a very subjective term. So a senior officer, and we're going to go through these in more detail. A person who has authority to either appoint, or, and it says approve, but it should be appoint or essentially fire either a senior officer or the majority of the board. An important decision maker or any someone who has any other form of substantial control of the company. Okay, so a senior officer. So FinCen has designated people in these positions are automatically considered a senior officer. So you have your president, your chief financial officer, general counsel, chief executive officer, and chief operations officer, or anyone else who performs similar functions. So you could have someone that's not, say, president in title, but they perform the duties that a president would perform. So they would qualify as a senior officer through that last provision would be they perform functions similar to that. Okay, so someone who has the power to appoint or remove either a senior officer, and when you're looking at senior officer, it would go back to that definition that I just talked about, or the majority of the board of directors. So if your institution has like bylaws, that would be a great way, or if your entity has bylaws, that would be a great way to look through those and see if it lays out who has that authority for your entity. Okay, so an important decision maker. That's another area that could be subjective. So FinCen really laid out several different areas for an important decision maker. They go through business, finance, and structural important decision makers. So different business important decision makers. So this would be someone who is going to make important decisions, business decisions, and who can significantly change activities of the business. So say you have a company that was traditionally a flooring company, but then they decided that they're going to enter the furniture market, and they're going to not only sell flooring, they're going to sell furniture too. Well, that's a significant change in the nature and scope of that business. So whoever has the ability to make that substantial or that significant change would be considered a beneficial owner. You'd also have someone who can either terminate lines of products or start new lines of products would be considered a beneficial owner, or change geographic focus. So if you decide to leave a market area or enter a market area, someone who has the ability to make that decision would be a beneficial owner. So for finance, typically for this finance category, I'm typically thinking of traditionally a CFO or CEO that has the ability to complete these tasks. So someone who can sell principal assets of that organization. And that might look different for each organization. For some, it might be a building or a big piece of machinery that's significant for that business. For a trucking company, it might be a semi. That would be a principal asset. So who has the ability to make those decisions? Who has the ability to approve the budget or incur some significant debt? So if you have a loan outstanding and the loan was taken out in the name of your entity, who signed those loan documents? There's probably a borrower authorization agreement where the entity named who could sign the loan documents and incur that debt on behalf of them. So if you currently have debt, look at those documents, see if you have that borrower authorization agreement, and they would be considered a beneficial owner. If you don't currently have debt, that would be a good thing to just think about who would sign that if you needed them to. And the last one would be the compensation committee. If your entity has a compensation committee, look at those. Look who's a member of that, and they would be an important decision maker. Okay, so for the structure, this would be who has the ability to really overhaul the entity and do a structural change of the entity. And I think a really good place to start is your bylaws. Or it might even be in the articles of incorporation document that you filed. So look at those documents and see who has those abilities, and those would be considered important decision makers and a beneficial owner. And then this is the catch-all. You're going to see there's several catch-alls in FinCen's requirements. And so this is the catch-all, any other substantial control. So if you have a person that is exercising substantial control that doesn't fall in any of the other categories I just talked about, this is the catch-all, is any other form of substantial control. Okay, so ownership interest. And remember, this is the other prong for the beneficial owner. We talked about substantial control. Now we're talking about ownership. And with the ownership interest, you remember that there's a 25% threshold. So they'd have to have ownership interest of at least 25% before they're going to be considered a beneficial owner. So you have equity, stock, voting rights, capital or profit interest, convertible instruments, or any options. And then the last bullet point's a catch-all again. Any other form or instrument contract used to establish ownership control of that entity. So remember, and it's not just actual ownership, you could have its ownership or control of the ownership. So for instance, if you have a trust and that trust is considered a reporting company, and we'll talk about trust a little later, the person who controls the trust and makes the decisions behind the trust would control that, have that own, if they were above that 25% ownership, then it would be a beneficial owner. So it's not just actual physical control. If they have ownership of the control, then that would also, if they were above the 25%, trigger them to be a beneficial owner. Okay, so there are several exemptions for the beneficial ownership, and we're going to go through each one of these. The first one is a minor child. If you have, and I really foresee the minor child exemption more being used for the ownership prong and probably not the substantial control prong. So if you have a minor child, then what can be reported is the parent or legal guardian of that minor child's information can be reported in lieu of the minor child's information. However, when that minor child becomes of age, that exemption no longer applies, and that form will have to be updated with their information. So the next one we're going to talk about is a custodian or agent for an entity. So this would be an individual who performs ordinary advisory or other contractual services, such as a tax professional. But they don't have that decision-making authority, then they would qualify for that exemption. They're just, in this exemption, the individual is merely acting on behalf of the beneficial owner, and they do not have the authority to make the significant decisions. The next one would be an inheritor. And for an inheritor, this is referring to the future interest through the right of inheritance. So it's not someone who actually has inherited, such as a business entity or property that would qualify them, more likely business entity, to be a beneficial owner, but they have the future right to. So maybe they were named in a will, but they don't have that right now. It hasn't been transferred to them. Well, while it is a future interest, they are exempt from beneficial ownership. However, once the person actually inherits the interest, the exemption no longer applies, and the beneficial ownership information must be reported. Okay, creditor. So if we have any banks on the phone or on this call, they might be interested in this one. So if you have debt with either a bank, a credit union, or it might just be private debt that you have, as long as the debt is you're just the entity that has your debt, you're paying them principal and interest to repay that debt. So you think about probably how most loans are structured if you have it at a bank. But there's no ownership interest tied to that, and it's literally just the loan, then it would be an exemption. However, if there's ownership interest tied to it and it's above the threshold, it would not be an exemption. And then the last one is an employee. Oh, sorry. And for the employee, all 3 bullet points have to be met for it to qualify for this exemption. So the first one, it has to be employee at will. The second one is the control or economic benefit of the reporting company is derived solely from that status, the employment status of the individual as an employee. And they are not a senior officer of the reporting company. So all 3 of those have to apply for that to be an exemption. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is a company applicant. And so what is a company applicant? So this would be a person that is actually filing the documents with the Secretary of State's office. So for entities created prior to January 1st, 2024, these are not required. You are not required to report company applicants. However, entities created after January 1st, 2024, and going forward, you will be required to report a company applicant. So there are 2 different types of company applicants. You have a direct filer and a person who directs or controls the filing. So a direct filer will be someone who is directly filing, who is actually physically filing those documents with the Secretary of State's office. An indirect, or sorry, directs the controlling of the filing action would be someone else who might be preparing the documents, getting them ready to file, but is not actually physically filing them with the Secretary of State's office. So if your entity was created after January 1st, 2024, you will have at least 1 company applicant. Companies themselves cannot be a company applicant. It would have to be an individual because an entity cannot walk themselves down to the Secretary of State's office and physically file those documents. A person has to do that. So a company can't be a company applicant. It would have to be an individual. The one thing with company applicants, so with beneficial owners, if the information changes, you are required to update it. With company applicants, you are not required to update this information. Once it's say that the person's a company applicant and their address changed, it doesn't matter. You don't have to change that information. Okay, so we're going to take another look at company applicants. So I'm going to go through examples of category 1 and category 2. You don't need to know what a category, you don't need to label people as a category 1 and a category 2, but just to know of what is required of you, you will have that they are in fact a company applicant. So say you have Sam and he created this new entity. He prepared all the documents and he actually filed them with the Secretary of State's office. He would be a direct filer. But say you have Sam created the new company, he created the necessary documents, but then he used his law firm ABC Law to file the documents with the Secretary of State's office. So ABC Law actually filed the documents with the Secretary of State's office. So that would be the direct filer, but Sam would be the person who controls the filing. So an accountant or an attorney could be considered a company applicant if they fit the definition, and if they file the documents with the Secretary of State's office. You can also have, if an attorney's office, say they offered business formation services, and so they created the incorporation documents and the documents needed to file with the Secretary of State's office, but then they used a paralegal to actually run the documents down to the Secretary of State's office and actually physically do the filing. So in that instance, you'd have the paralegal would be the direct filer, and the attorney would be the person that controls that filing. So they would both be considered a company applicant. Like I said, you don't need to know if they're category 1 or category 2. You just need to know that they're a company applicant. And you could have more than 1 company applicant. And especially if you have a law firm, you might see this. If your organization no longer has a relationship with that company applicant, you don't take them off, you don't change it. Whoever filed those documents with the Secretary of State's office is who filed them, and that doesn't change. So they will always be your company applicant. Okay, so next we're going to talk about trusts. And so, and I'm actually gonna, second, let me. I just got notification that my laptop is running low on battery. What are the odds? Bear with me for just a second. I'm gonna go plug it up so I don't go blank. I apologize for that.
And while we're waiting, if you have any questions up until this point, you are welcome to put those in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation.
Okay, I'm so sorry for that. Your computer always seems to die at the worst time. Okay, so trust. If you have a trust, is it considered a reporting company? And so it all goes back to that Secretary of State filing. If it is filed with the documents are filed with the Secretary of State's office, it would be considered a reporting company. But that's going to change state to state because every state has different laws regarding how trusts are filed. In the state of Kentucky, if you have a business trust, and a business trust is a trust that holds the rights to an individual stake in the business. So if it's a business trust, it is required to be filed with the Secretary of State's office. If it's a statutory trust, which typically contain assets such as money or property, then it would not be required to be filed with the Secretary of State's office. If your entity has trust in a different state, look at whatever state that is to see the applicable laws for if it would be required to file or not. If, say, your trust goes to court over some dispute over how the trust was handled, the documents of going to court itself would not make it a reporting company. It all goes back to, is it being required to file with the Secretary of State's office? So that's why at the beginning, you'll notice a lot of things are all going back to that Secretary of State filing. That's really the ultimate trigger, unless it files for an exemption. Okay, so we've talked about if, what's required to be filed. Here's a quick overview. For your reporting company, legal name, trade name, or doing business as. If your trade name or doing business as name changes, you're going to have to change it within FinCen database. A current street address. So that's important. And I wanted to bring up because it has to be a physical street address. You cannot put a PO box. A PO box is not allowed for either reporting company, beneficial owner, or company applicant. The jurisdiction of formation and registration, and a tax identification number, which is going to be your EIN. If you have a foreign entity that has not yet received a tax identification number in the US to be operating, then what would be accepted is an equivalent to the tax identification number of that foreign jurisdiction and the name of the jurisdiction. And if this applies to you and you have questions, what I would suggest is just contact FinCen and see, hey, is this the correct information that I need to input for this? For a beneficial owner, the individual's name, and what you'll notice with the beneficial owner and the company applicant is it's the same information that needs to be reported. You will have the individual's name, date of birth, the physical address, so like I said, not a PO box, and the identifying number of their ID. So you need, and we'll talk about on the next slide, acceptable forms of ID. But you will need, like if it's a driver's license, your driver's license number, where it was issued, and then you're going to upload a picture of it. If you have, say your beneficial owner is in a temporary address and they maybe are in an apartment, and it's going to change, and it's not a permanent address, so maybe they're looking for a house. What you'd fill out on this form is where they're physically at now. So if they're in an apartment in a temporary housing, that's what you would put as your residential address. If that were to change, you update that within 30 days of the change. Okay, so acceptable forms of identification. You have a U.S. driver's license, identification used by U.S. local government or an Indian tribe. So what you might see for this, typically when I see an identification issued by a local government, maybe by the state of Kentucky, would be someone who doesn't have a driver's license, but still needs a form of ID. Also, a U.S. or foreign passport would also qualify. Now, the important thing with all of these forms of identification is they cannot be expired. They have to be current. If your beneficial owner gets a new driver's license or any sort of ID and it changes the name, address, or identifying number, it's going to have to be updated in FinCen system, and you're going to have to upload a new picture of it within the system. So just keep that in mind. If you have a beneficial owner who, for religious reasons, doesn't have a picture on their ID, as long as it's an acceptable form of identification, then you would upload that and it'd be okay if it was for religious reasons that they don't have a picture on their ID. Now, one place where I could see could be a potential issue for this, and I don't know if we have any of those people on the call, would be there's a sector of the Amish population that does not even have a form of ID, which is tricky when they're opening up accounts at banks. But if you run into that, what I would suggest is contact FinCen and let them guide you on what to do. Okay, we're almost done. So I'm going to really quickly click on this website, and we're going to kind of walk through very quickly. Okay, what the system actually looks like. So you click the link and it takes you to this page, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and you will have access to this PowerPoint. So it'll be a good link to kind of point you in the right direction. So if you go to File BOIR, you could choose File PDF, online, or that system-to-system API. And it, like I said, it's going to direct you to contact FinCen. So if you go to the online, you have all the different types of information that you need. So you have the filing information. So this would be where you click if it's a newly exempt entity. The date filed, reporting company, what's their name, tax identification number, company applicant, name. We'll talk about the FinCen ID in a second. But if they have one, you put it there. And then at the very bottom is going to be where you upload a picture of the identification. And then at the very end, you would submit the information. Okay. And I'll walk through it. I didn't submit it because I don't have information to submit. I don't have an entity that needs to be filed, but it looked fairly straightforward. Okay, so what is a FinCen identifier? So FinCen can issue a unique FinCen ID if you request it from them. And so what you can do is companies or beneficial owners can put their FinCen ID in lieu of the personal information of the beneficial ownership report. So what's required to submit this is legal name, date of birth, unique identifying number, issuing jurisdiction, and image of the document. So where I could see this being used is if you have a beneficial owner that has interest or interest or control in multiple different entities. And so it would be much easier if they just put in the FinCen identifier and it had all that information. Same thing with the company applicant. The law firm could request that, and then it just makes it easier for them so they don't have to physically input everything else. And then I also had the link in the PowerPoint if you want to make that request, where to click. One thing I did want to bring to your attention really quickly, and I know we're running out of time, I'm going to quickly speed up. So March 1st, 2024, there was a case brought up in the Northern District Court of Alabama. And so this was against the National Small Business Association. And in this court case, or this was brought up, sorry, by the National Small Business Association, the judge proceeding this did grant an injunction for anyone that was a part of this organization, which is the National Small Business Association, which consists of 65,000 members. So it is in the middle of, it will go to trial to see if it's constitutional or not. So what he concluded was that he felt that it could exceed Constitution's limits on Congress's power of this rule is. So in the meantime, if you are a member of the National Small Business Association, you do not have to file until this court case is resolved. Hopefully it's resolved. I'm hoping by the end of the year. That might be really optimistic thinking. Before that, all those entities that were originated prior to January 1st, 2024 are required to file. But if you do qualify for this exemption, just keep an eye on this court case to see, and you choose to wait, keep an eye to make sure that they haven't passed something and you're just not aware of it. So there's two resources. One is the Small Business Guide, and then one's the Beneficial Ownership Information Q&A. So there's links to both of these. They are really helpful in kind of helping you determine, do you qualify as a reporting entity or do you qualify as an exemption? Under each exemption, for instance, it goes through and it asks questions. So it's going to help you determine if you truly do qualify for that exemption. I always recommend that if you think you do, just double check to make sure you actually do. But that is all I have. I'm going to turn it over to anyone with questions.
Well, Jesse, that's a lot of information for something brand new that's coming out and is being requested from our small business owners and our financial institutions. Like you said, even if you have had to give that information to a financial institution, you still have to give this information to FinCen outside of that. So that's one of the notes that I took. Was that still must be reported and registered, even if you've had to give that same information to some other agency as well. So that's good. The other one is that if you're currently inactive, you don't have to report these things now. So that's a good exemption to know about. And of course, the timeline that I wrote down is that if you were in existence before 2024, you actually have till January the 1st of 2025 to register. And then those small businesses that have registered with the Secretary of State in 2024 have 90 days in order to be registered. And then starting in 2025, you have 30 days to register, is what I have wrote down. So the other thing that I have wrote down in my notes is a sole proprietor, because the state of Kentucky, they don't register anything with the state of Kentucky. And as a sole proprietor, you should be registering your business in the local county clerk's office. Those people are not required to register anything. I do think the thing that comes up a lot and will probably be something of very useful is the substantial control, and when you're not the owner of the business. I think that will, the documentation you've provided here in order for us to go back through those things to check box if you are or are not in substantial control of a business, even though you're not the owner, I think is going to be very helpful. And not to forget too, that you need to be 25% or more as beneficial owner, I guess, in order to have those as part of the registration. So Kyle, you were watching the chat box and the Q&A. So do we have any questions in any of those, in either of those boxes?
Yes, so we have 4 questions so far, and I'll start off with the order that I will repeat them in the order that they were received. So Kathy asked, how would we know if everything is filed correctly or if something else is needed?
So that is a very good question. FinCen does not have a checking mechanism right now, so that would just be, they probably are not going to come out and, if you have all the information physically there in the system, I would say that they are probably not going to look unless they need to look and verify that. They won't have the ability to do that to verify everyone. So what instances, if it raises attention to them, then they will. But for everyone, there's not, for instance, if you have an issue, like a red box, if you put everything in a box now, if you left a box blank, it will. But there's not that self-checking mechanism. It's on you.
So Jesse, do you know if once you click submit, it says your submission has been submitted? Do you know if that's at the end of the submission or anything?
I do not. That's a very good question because I didn't have anything to submit. I went through it up until that point, but I didn't actually see the confirmation.
Okay.
Okay, and Maria asked, will businesses have to file this annually or just when there are changes?
Good question. Just when there are changes. So once you file it initially, it's just when there's changes.
Okay. And Jared asked, how will businesses be notified when they need to file with FinCen? Will the Secretary of State be mailing them the information and instructions on how to file, or is it just up to the business owners to find this information out on their own, I guess?
It would be up to the business owners to self-identify if they are required to file or not, which is why FinCen has given a very long description of, are you required to file? But if you are a filing company, you by law have to file or you could face a penalty. So you'll have to figure it out.
Mhm.
Which
And
doesn't make it easy on our small businesses.
no, absolutely not. And Kelly asked, what is the bank's responsibility in all of this? Since we have so many bankers on the call, that is a great question, Kelly.
It is. So there was an interagency guidance that was issued into December. So as long banks can opt, once they get access, they will get access to the system eventually. They don't have access right now. They are one of the last people on the totem pole to get access. First is law enforcement, and it kind of goes down from there, and then they are the last. I contacted FinCen, and they did not give me to see if there's a timeline for when financial institutions would have access to the system, and they did not provide me any timeline. So when I spoke to a federal regulator, they estimated it to not expect it before year end 2024. So once I notice that you have access to it, I will send out an email to all our member banks letting them know. Now, what is your responsibility? That interagency guidance was very key because you could choose not to access this system. You choose not to have access. Just get the beneficial ownership information as you always have. The beneficial ownership, and for those that are small businesses, probably not making any sense. But for our banks, the requirement for you getting the beneficial ownership information, you got to stick with those requirements. Nothing from your requirements have changed. And if you notice, so for institutions, the company applicant, you didn't have to get. That has not changed. That's just for what FinCen is requiring from companies, not what you are required to get. So your requirements have not changed. Long story, long answer.
All right. And Jane asks, so if all individuals are 10% owners and have the same rights, are just the officers listed as the controlling individuals?
So if the individuals are 10% owners, the if you have a position in those senior officer positions, or if they have any other form of substantial control, then they would be a beneficial owner. If they just have 10% ownership, but they're not in one of those officer positions that were specified in the PowerPoint, or have significant control, they would not be.
All right. So that
25%.
Okay, so that concludes all the questions that I'm seeing at this point in time, and we are. Oh, one more came in from Aline, and it says in relation to BSA for financial institutions, we will still only be documenting in our systems the owner/controller prongs,
Yes.
correct? No company applicant info.
Yep. No company applicant info. Your requirements have not changed.
Well, great. Jesse, can't thank you enough. And I think by having a lot of bankers on here along with small business owners, that small business owners now see that banks don't collect this information just to be collecting it. So I know when I was a former banker, I got asked all the time, why are you collecting this information? And just knowing that our federal and state government a lot of times wants information on ownerships of businesses, that, believe me, I know from my standpoint, I'd rather not have been collecting it, because it was just another thing that we had to do on the back end. So, but I hope this does help a lot of our business owners understand as well that banks just collect information for those who in the federal government or state government to fulfill, what's being required of the financial industries. And it's getting more and more as we go through this. So, Kyle, I think I saw one more question come in really quick right there at the end.
I have no idea. So I believe it's asking why business owners have no idea about this reporting. So I guess maybe it's asking why is the government not doing a better job of informing business owners of this new law?
So that is a great question. So I met with FinCen, went to something where FinCen was presenting last summer, and they kept talking about this great advertisement platform that they were planning. And then it got closer to year end, and it's like radio silent. So I think that a lot of business owners do not know. My husband is going to have to file. He had no idea. I had to tell him. So I think that's something that FinCen has not done very, very well. But they will still have to file. They're still held to that responsibility, even if though you're right, it has not been well broadcasted.
Exactly. And thank you for that question, because it's something that the Kentucky Small Business Development Center has learned about. And so, we're trying to be proactive in helping our small business owners across the entire state of Kentucky, along with our Kentucky Bankers Association, and trying to educate as many people as we can. So thank you for that question. And we've often asked that exact same thing, as well as why it's not. And so, we decided, like I said, to be proactive and try to help our small business owners understand what's going to be required of them this year and the following years to come in this endeavor. So, okay, we're past our 1 o'clock hour, and certainly thank you, Jesse, for a very informative presentation for our small business owners and our financial partners that we work with across the state of Kentucky. And, we'll keep an eye on this and see if there's any other changes, and especially with the suit that's happened in Alabama. That was something new that I didn't hear about yet. So that's something we're watching an eye on. But as we end our webinar, we thank you for attending with us. We will be sending out a recorded presentation or the link to that this recording along with Jesse's presentation as well. So that has the links in there for you to be able to refer back to and gather your information that you need to make your reporting. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend. Bye.